Gaza Week, Part 4. The Culture of Palestine. 3,000 years of roots and resilience. When people talk about Gaza and Palestine today, it's usually in the language of war, loss, and destruction. But before we talk about any violence, we need to remember something essential. This is a people filled with people, with a culture that stretches back thousands of years to some of the earliest civilizations in recorded history. Archaeologists trace Palestinian lineage back about 3,000 years to the Canaanites and Philistines, ancient peoples who lived along the Mediterranean coast. Gaza itself was once a thriving port in the land of Canaan, a crossroads of trade and language and beautiful art. This is not a new land. This is not a blank slate. Families living in Gaza today can trace their roots there for hundreds of years, often longer, connected by stories, oral traditions, and land that has been passed down generation after generation, hand to hand. Palestinian identity grew out of this mix of ancient roots, Islamic and Christian traditions, Ottoman influences, and Arab cultural life. In cities like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, and Gaza, you had markets alive with fabrics, spices, and music. Villages were organized around olive groves and citrus orchards. Families passed down recipes like makluba, a rice and vegetable dish flipped upside down at the table, and nafa, a sweet cheese pastry soaked in syrup. These foods are not just meals, they're cultural markers, reminders of home and family and connection. Palestinian art, especially embroidery, known as tatris, is another centuries-old expression. Every pattern has meaning, where you're from, your family, your status. Women stitch their history into cloth, passing identity through thread. Even now, displaced Palestinian women in refugee camps still teach tatris to younger generations, so the culture doesn't vanish. Literature and poetry have also been central. Figures like Mahmoud Darwish, often called the national poet of Palestine, wrote about exile, love, and the longing for return to his homeland. His words are carved into cultural memory. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? Poetry became a way of resisting erasure. Even when land was taken, words would remain. Music, too, that carried heritage, from the sound of the oud, an ancient string instrument, to the folk dabke dance, a line dance with stomps and shouts performed at weddings and celebrations. Palestinian culture lived through rhythm and movement. Families scattered by displacement carried dabke with them across borders. So even in exile, the stomp of feet kept them tied to their homeland. 10 toes down. Today in Gaza, so much of this culture is under direct attack. Not just the people, but their monuments, their history, their memory, their culture. The Great Mosque of Gaza was the oldest and largest mosque in Gaza, built on a site of worship stretching back to the Byzantine era. In December 2023, airstrikes reduced it to rubble. Its minaret snapped in half. Centuries of history gone in moments. The Al-Saka House, a 17th century Ottoman merchant's palace in Gaza's old city, was flattened by strikes in November. It had stood for hundreds of years as one of the last surviving examples of Ottoman architecture in Gaza. The Qasr al-Basha, a 13th century Mamluk palace later turned into a museum, was struck in December. Once it held classrooms, courtyards, and displays of Gaza's medieval history, now its stones are scattered to oblivion. Khan Yunis, a castle built in 1387, where travelers along the spice route once stopped, has been heavily damaged. And the ancient port of Anthedon, dating back to the 8th century BCE, where Phoenicians and Greeks once sailed, has been almost completely destroyed. Even Gaza's museums, places where people had tried to protect heritage, are gone. The Rafah Museum was destroyed. The Al-Qahara Museum in Khan Yunis, which held artifacts from the Canaanite period, was smashed apart. UNESCO, the United Nations agency responsible for cultural preservation, confirmed that at least 110 cultural and historical sites in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed since the war began. Palestinian officials put the number even higher. 207 out of 320 heritage sites have been reduced to rubble. This isn't just war. This is erasure. When you take away a people's ancient mosques, their forts, their museums, their manuscripts, you're not only killing the present, you're attempting to erase their past. You're trying to cut the thread of cultural continuity so that years from now, there is nothing to rebuild from. And yet, resilience remains. You see it when families still cook traditional foods, even if all they have left is flour and oil. You see it in parents telling folk tales to children at night in tents, preserving stories even when books are gone. You see it in young people uploading music and art online despite blackouts. Palestinian culture has adapted to survive, moving into the digital space, surviving in exile, carried in memory, embroidered, and song. It's important to say this culture is not new, not made up, it's ancient, rich, and deeply tied to the land. And no matter how many times it has faced erasure from occupation, from displacement, from bombing, it continues. Because culture isn't only stone or cloth. Culture is memory, practice, resilience, connection, families. When we talk about Gaza today, we must see more than rubble. We must see children learning dabke steps in a refugee camp. We must see the mothers stitching tatris under dim light. We must hear the echo of Darwish poetry whispered in tents. We must taste bread baked over open fire with flour from aid sacks turned into a symbol of survival. That is what 3,000 years of culture looks like. Under siege. Not gone, not forgotten, but surviving against all odds. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that destroying an ancient culture and its people, which is made of children, women, and men, rooted in ancient traditions, is something we cannot stand for. Free Palestine. End the genocide in Gaza. And immediately stop killing innocent civilians, children, women, and men who deserve a peaceful place to exist on planet Earth.